He wowed crowds from coast to coast, the king of piano, the one we loved the most. Little Richard, the Georgia-born music sensation, brought a style all his own to the rock and roll scene. Despite his massive success, he grappled with his sexuality, sometimes identifying as gay or omnisexual. But surprise, he also had a thing for the ladies and even started a family. So who's the lucky lady in his life? Join us today as we explore the fascinating life of the godfather of rock and roll. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Let's go. Early years. Richard Penniman, better known as Little Richard, was born in Macon, Georgia, to Leva Mae and Charles Bud Penniman, a bootlegger. Despite his father's illegal occupation, the family was deeply religious. Growing up in poverty and facing racism, singing was an important part of Richard's early life, helping to strengthen his family's faith. The Penniman family formed a gospel group called the Penniman Singers, performing in local churches and participating in contests with other singing families. Richard's loud, energetic singing earned him the nickname Warhawk from his siblings. He was influenced by musical legends like Mahalia Jackson, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and brother Joe May, known as the Thunderbolt of the Middle West. Even as a child, Richard stood out for his high vocal range and powerful voice. However, his father disapproved of Richard's effeminate mannerisms and eventually kicked him out of the house when he was a teenager. Richard then went to live with Ann and Johnny Johnson, a white couple who ran a local venue called the Tick-Tock Club. Richard was not the best student, but he was a quick study when it came to music. He first learned to play the piano in church, but his style really took off after he heard Ike Turner's Rocket 88 and studied S.Q. Reeder Jr., known as Escarita. This led to his signature-pounding, mesmerizing piano style. During his teenage years, Richard bounced between different groups like Buster Brown's Orchestra, where he earned the nickname Little Richard, and the Tidy Jolly Steppers. He also performed under the name Princess Lavon, sometimes wearing a red evening gown in Sugarfoot Sam's minstrel show. These shows were in their twilight years, and Richard found himself in a world filled with strippers, drag queens, and bold comedians. He took inspiration from Atlanta-based performers like Roy Brown, who was known for Good Rockin' Tonight, and he adopted the flamboyant style and makeup of jump blues singer Billy Wright. Richard played at the Dewdrop Inn in New Orleans, where the master of ceremonies was the famous female impersonator and performer Patsy Vidalia. Although Richard regularly attended the New Hope Baptist Church in Macon, he was most captivated by the experiences he had in Pentecostal churches. He loved the music and excitement, especially participating in the holy dance and speaking in tongues with other congregation members. There were even stories of people claiming Richard had the gift of healing through his singing. During his formative years, Richard was heavily influenced by gospel artists from the 1930s and 1940s. His favorite singer as a child was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and he had the chance to sing with her on stage at the Macon City Auditorium in 1945. Marion Williams also had a significant impact on him, and Richard adopted his iconic shout of "Hoo-oh-oh-oh" from her. Billy Wright, a blues shouter, influenced Richard's appearance, including his hair, clothing, shoes, and makeup. Additionally, the powerful gospel singer Brother Joe May, known as the Thunderbolt, left a lasting impression on Richard. Richard's piano-playing style was shaped by S.Q. Reeder Jr., better known as Escarita. Escarita showed Richard how to emphasize high notes while keeping a dynamic boogie bass line, a technique that became a hallmark of Richard's playing. Richard openly acknowledged Escarita's influence, saying, "I used to get in a room and try to make my piano sound just like him. He had so much energy." Besides his musical influences, Richard also learned to incorporate ministerial qualities with theatrics by watching traveling medicine shows in Macon. These shows had vibrant lead performers who wore extravagant capes, robes, and turbans. Richard picked up elements of their flamboyant style and blended them with his own energetic stage presence, creating a unique and captivating performance style. Career. Sister Rosetta Tharpe heard Richard singing her songs before one of her shows at the Macon City Auditorium in the 1940s. She was so impressed that she asked him to open the show for her and even paid him. This moment lit a fire in Richard to become a performer. He dropped out of school after 9th grade and joined Hudson's Medicine Show in 1949. Later, he moved to Houston and formed a band called Tempo Toppers, playing gigs across the South. In 1955, Richard sent a demo to Specialty Records, and later that year, he released Tutti Frutti. The song was an instant hit, reaching the second spot on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues Bestsellers chart and making waves on the pop charts in both the US and the UK. Richard quickly rose to fame, with 16 of his next songs topping the charts. His shows were packed and were known for bringing together white and black audiences. After a few incredible years, Richard decided to leave rock and roll and embrace born-again Christianity. But in 1962, he was talked into touring Europe, and during this tour, the Beatles opened for him. Over the next decades, Richard kept performing, though he would sometimes step away to focus on his faith. Despite these breaks, he was a huge influence on American music and one of the first black artists to reach a wide audience. From his first album in 1957 to his last in 2005, Richard released a total of 25 albums. Throughout his career, Little Richard received numerous awards and accolades. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986 and later into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He also received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Recording Academy and the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. In 2015, the National Museum of African American Music honored him with a Rhapsody and Rhythm Award for his pivotal role in promoting African American music and culture during a time of significant racial divide in the U.S. Additionally, his iconic song, Tutti Frutti, was added to the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress in 2010. Richard grappling with his sexuality and religion. For over 6 decades, Little Richard's energetic rock and roll style captivated audiences, but alongside his musical legacy, he was known for the complexity of his relationship with his sexual orientation and the impact of his faith on it. Born Richard Wayne Penniman in 1932 in Macon, Georgia, Little Richard openly acknowledged his identity as a gay man. Charles White's 1984 biography, The Life and Times of Little Richard, compiled anecdotes from Richard and his associates, offering a narrative of his journey from a young Georgia gospel singer to a prominent figure in Southern rock and roll. The biography delves into the sexual experiences of his youth that played a role in shaping his sexual identity over the years. From a young age, Little Richard expressed a feminine inclination, often wearing his mother's makeup and clothes. However, at the age of 15, he faced rejection from his deacon father, leading to his expulsion from the family home. Undeterred, he embarked on his entertainment career, performing at various venues in Atlanta and touring the Chitlin Circuit, a network of venues in the South that provided a safe space for black artists during the era of segregation. By the end of the 1950s, he felt a spiritual calling to turn away from secular music. He enrolled in Oakwood College to study theology, responding to what he believed was a message from God to redirect his life's path. Richard found solace in his biblical studies, embracing the idea of praising God through music. During this period, he believed he had achieved peace with God and should live according to divine intentions. However, his time at Oakwood College was not without challenges. He acknowledged facing personal struggles, describing encounters with devils. There were incidents, such as asking a deacon's son to expose himself, that reflected his internal conflicts and struggles with what he perceived as unnatural affections. This internal turmoil led to a self-loathing that complicated his understanding of his own identity. In addition to his homosexual activities, Richard engaged in voyeurism in his 20s, paying men to allow him to observe them having sex with women, sometimes forcibly. He described feelings of anger and regret after such encounters, leading to a reluctance to discuss or confront those aspects of his life. His voyeuristic pursuits eventually led to legal trouble, resulting in his arrest for sexual misconduct after being found with a couple in a car at a Macon gas station. Despite this complex history, Richard's later interview with Three Angels Broadcasting presented a different perspective. He commented on the state of contemporary pop culture, expressing concern about what he perceived as unnatural affection and a lack of focus on faith. In this interview, he conveyed a message of universal love and salvation from God, emphasizing that regardless of one's identity or past actions, God's love is all-encompassing and can lead to redemption by acknowledging one's sins. Was he gay? Growing up, Richard wasn't like the other boys. He preferred playing with dolls, his walk was a flamboyant strut, and his voice, well, that voice held a melody that couldn't be contained. This unmanly behavior didn't sit well with his father, who saw nothing but punishment in Richard's painted nails and borrowed dresses. Teenage years brought confusion for Richard. He explored love with both boys and girls, but his constant sway between effeminacy and masculinity clashed with his family's expectations. At the harsh age of 15, his father, unable to reconcile his son's true colors, made the heartbreaking decision to cast him out. But Richard, with a spirit as bright as his dreams, wouldn't be extinguished. He carried the fire of his individuality, the spark of his talent, and a name that would soon electrify the world: Little Richard. Who was his wife? Ernestine Campbell, a former American secretary from Washington, D.C., gained fame as the spouse of musician Little Richard. Born in 1939 in the United States, she became known for her association with the renowned musician. Little Richard, a dominant figure in music and culture for over 7 decades, rose to prominence in the mid-1950s as the architect of rock and roll. His captivating showmanship and dynamic music, characterized by frenzied piano playing and pounding backbeats, cemented his legacy in the music industry. Ernestine and Little Richard's relationship blossomed after their initial meeting, culminating in their marriage on July 12, 1959. However, their union encountered challenges, leading to their divorce in 1964. While the specific reasons for their separation remain undisclosed, speculation arose about Little Richard's increasing fame and rumored involvement in certain sexual activities, including homosexuality, potentially contributing to their marital dissolution. Ernestine's relatives, Robinson and Harvin, publicly raised allegations about Little Richard's sexuality during this period. During their marriage, Ernestine and Little Richard adopted a 1-year-old son named Danny Jones from a deceased church member, showcasing their commitment to family and compassion for others. Despite their divorce, their adopted child Danny maintained strong ties with Little Richard, often assuming the role of his father's bodyguard, underscoring the enduring bond between them. Unfortunately, the couple's union came to an end in 1964. Ernestine Harvin, Little Richard's wife, initially described their marriage as harmonious, marked by regular and healthy intimacy. However, she attributed the challenges that emerged later in their relationship to her husband's increasing fame, which brought its own set of pressures and complexities. Allegations of Richard's neglect as a husband and his sexuality are said to have contributed to the breakdown of their marriage. Following their separation, Ernestine and Little Richard amicably decided to end their marriage, choosing to maintain a close friendship despite parting ways romantically. Subsequently, Ernestine remarried on March 23, 1975, tying the knot with McDonald Campbell of Santa Barbara, California, marking a new chapter in her life beyond her previous marriage with Little Richard. His son was adopted. Danny was born in the USA back in 1970, growing up with his 6 sisters and 3 brothers in his hometown. When he was just 12, his dad sadly passed away, leaving Danny and his siblings to be raised by their mom alone. 2 years later, in 1984, Little Richard, the famous singer, sort of unofficially adopted Danny, and they became like family. Danny ended up living with Little Richard in a simple 2-room suite at the Hyatt, becoming his constant companion for the next 36 years until Little Richard passed away in 2020. Looking back, Danny remembers how his dad used to drop these little nuggets of wisdom on him, even though they didn't always make sense at the time. Taking after his dad, Danny also got into music. He'd tag along on his dad's tours and dabble in the music scene himself. But while he's been around music his whole life, his solo stuff hasn't quite hit the big time. Danny's a private guy, steering clear of social media, so we don't really know much about his personal life, like if he's hitched or not. But hey, given his age, it wouldn't be a shocker if he's got a partner in crime. What is his net worth? Although Little Richard recently died, with an estate estimated at $40 million, it could have been much greater if he had made better business decisions. He sold the rights to his hit song, Tutti Frutti, to Specialty Records for $50 plus a half cent for each record sold in 2020. The record company earned millions, losses due to addictions. If it weren't for his drug addiction, Little Richard's net worth could have been 10 times higher. During the 1960s and 1970s, he lost 90% of his wealth due to his addictions. At the height of his career, Little Richard was blowing all his money on parties and drugs. He also lost millions gambling, especially on poker. Estimates suggest he lost a staggering $17 million on poker alone during his lifetime and an additional $5 million on other forms of gambling, according to Forbes. In the 1970s, Richard confessed that his addictions to cocaine, PCP, and heroin were costing him up to $2,000 a day. These issues led to the cancellation of many concerts and the loss of numerous endorsements, severely impacting his income and overall wealth. His late career. During this time, Little Richard became a big name in showbiz, regularly showing up on American TV. He was even a judge on Simon Cowell's Celebrity Duets in 2006. His songs were featured in ads and movies, and he collaborated with huge names like Bon Jovi and Elton John. And that's not all. He was also an ordained minister, officiating the wedding of Bruce Willis and Demi Moore. He was a true entertainer, both on and off the stage, but his impact on music was undeniable, and he was recognized for it with inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in 1986 and a Lifetime Achievement Grammy in 1993. Little Richard was a pioneer, one of the first musical icons to break down barriers and influence generations to come. He stood tall as one of the last remaining icons of his era. However, health issues started to slow him down in the late 2000s, leading to heart surgery and hip replacement. But even that didn't stop him from performing. He'd just do it seated at his keyboard. In 2013, he officially retired, but he made one last public appearance in 2019, receiving the Distinguished Artist Award at the Tennessee Governor's Arts Awards. Little Richard may have left the stage, but his legacy and influence continue to inspire and entertain generations. How did he die? Richard really wore himself out with all that hard work, and it started to show with some health issues. He had a bunch of problems, like issues with his hip, a stroke, and even a heart attack. But that didn't stop him from keeping on keeping on. In October 1985, Little Richard came back from England to film a guest spot on the cool TV show Miami Vice. But things took a turn for the worse when, after the taping, he got into a nasty car accident in West Hollywood, California. He broke his right leg, some ribs, and also had injuries to his head and face. Ouch! It was a long road to recovery for Little Richard. He had to go through months of medical treatment and rehab. Unfortunately, because of how bad his injuries were, he couldn't even go to the first-ever Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremony in January 1986, even though he was supposed to be one of the people inducted. He sent a recorded message instead, which was still pretty cool. In 2007, Little Richard started having trouble walking due to sciatica in his left leg, which meant he had to rely on crutches to get around. Things got even tougher in November 2009 when he had to undergo surgery to replace his left hip. Even though he tried to get back into performing the following year, his hip issues just wouldn't let up. He often had to be brought on stage in a wheelchair and could only perform while seated. Despite his health continuing to decline, Little Richard was a fighter. With the help of medical care and his own determination, he kept going. Unfortunately, on May 9, 2020, after battling an illness for 2 months, Little Richard passed away at the age of 87 in his home in Tullahoma, Tennessee. It turned out that he had bone cancer. At least he was surrounded by his brother, sister, and son during his final moments. Ernestine Financial Assets and Real Estate. Ernestine Campbell is a private person who likes to keep her life out of the spotlight. She's estimated to be worth around $40,000, which is pretty impressive. It's clear that she's not one for attention, as she's not active on any social media platforms either. Now, her ex-husband, Little Richard, on the other hand, had a net worth of a whopping $40 million. That's a lot of zeros. It just goes to show how successful his career was. Tennessee mansion. In the year 2000, Little Richard settled down in a mansion he either bought or built in Lynchburg, Tennessee. This mansion, sitting pretty on 17 private acres, became his home sweet home for the rest of his life. After he passed away, his estate sold the place for $349,000 in November 2020. But get this, just a year later, it popped back up on the market with a price tag of $1.75 million. Thanks for joining us as we celebrated the life of Little Richard. What's your favorite Little Richard song? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations of musical legends. See you next time.